Between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski carried out a mail bombing campaign that targeted individuals and institutions associated with modern technology. He murdered 3 people and injured 23 others in his crusade against what he saw as the destructive forces of industrial society. In 1995, Kaczynski sent a letter to the New York Times promising to desist from terrorism if they published his manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future. The FBI agreed to this unusual request, hoping that publication would lead someone to recognize Kaczynski's writing style. The essay appeared in the Washington Post that September. It was a gamble that paid off. Kaczynski's brother David recognized the prose as his siblings and alerted the FBI. This crucial tip led to Kaczynski's arrest in Lincoln, Montana, in April of 1996. Kaczynski pleaded guilty to all charges in 198 and was sentenced to multiple life terms without parole. He died in prison in June of 2023. May 22, 1942, Ted Kaczynski was born in Chicago. His parents were working-class Polish Americans who later became atheists. From an early age, Kaczynski displayed a sharp mind, excelling in mathematics and earning a place at Harvard at just 16. By 1969, he had decided to leave academia behind, choosing instead a life of self-reliance and solitude. That same year, he left behind the world of universities and research. In 1971, he moved to a remote cabin near Lincoln, Montana, where he lived without electricity or running water, cutting himself off from modern society. The reasons for this shift remain unclear, but it marked the beginning of a campaign that would span nearly 2 decades. What led him from academic brilliance to a life in the wilderness remains one of the many unanswered questions surrounding his early years. In 1969, Ted Kaczynski made a pivotal decision. He abandoned his promising academic career. Choosing instead a path of solitude, he retreated from the world he once knew and began to build a new life for himself in the remote wilderness. By 1971, he had moved to a secluded cabin near Lincoln, Montana. There, without electricity or running water, Kaczynski spent his days learning survival skills, building shelters, and growing his own food. The isolation deepened his belief that modern society was out of control. He wrote extensively during this period, refining the ideas that would later form the basis of his manifesto, a critique of technology and modern society. The growing distance from the world he once knew made him more determined to act. What had begun as a quiet retreat had, by the early 1970s, become the foundation of a radical ideology that would soon bring destruction to many. In September 1995, the Washington Post published a 35,000-word manifesto titled Industrial Society and Its Future. The text outlined a radical critique of modern technology and its perceived destruction of human freedom. It was anonymous, but it carried a distinct voice. David Kaczynski, Ted's younger brother, read the essay and recognized the writing style. It was unmistakable. His brother's. He had known Ted since childhood, and the prose, the structure, the ideas, all aligned with someone he had grown up with. David and his wife, Linda, contacted the FBI. Their suspicions led investigators to a remote cabin near Lincoln, Montana. On April 3, 1996, Ted Kaczynski was arrested there. The publication of the manifesto, authorized by Attorney General Janet Reno, had been a calculated risk. But it worked. The author had been identified, and David Kaczynski, the only family member to survive the bombing campaign, had played a pivotal role in ending it. Between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski launched a nationwide mail bombing campaign targeting individuals and institutions he believed were advancing industrialization at the expense of nature and human freedom. His attacks spanned nearly 2 decades, striking academics, researchers, and business people associated with modern technology. The FBI initially labeled the case as Unabomb due to the focus on universities and airlines, a designation that led to the media referring to Kaczynski as the Unabomber. In 1995, Kaczynski sent a letter to the New York Times offering to cease his bombing campaign if his manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, was published. The manifesto, which opposed modern technology and called for a return to a more primitive way of life, was published in the Washington Post in September 1995 after Attorney General Janet Reno supported the move to help identify the author. Kaczynski believed that his violent actions, as a form of direct action when words were insufficient, would draw attention to his critique of technology and industrial society. The publication of the manifesto generated significant public interest and debate, ultimately leading to Kaczynski's identification and arrest in 1996. The manifesto was a manifesto of anti-technology ideology and would be the key to his identification. In 1995, Ted Kaczynski sent a letter offering to cease his bombings if his manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, was published in a major newspaper. The text articulated an anti-technology ideology, arguing that industrialization had eroded human freedom and dignity. It criticized the societal acceptance of technological advancements without considering their long-term effects on individual autonomy. Kaczynski believed that his violent actions, which he saw as direct action when words were insufficient, would draw attention to the dangers of industrial society and its impact on the natural environment. The manifesto formed the ideological foundation of his mail bomb campaign, which targeted individuals and institutions associated with modern technology. Despite widespread condemnation of his actions, some of Kaczynski's ideas continued to resonate with segments of the public. The essay was housed in the Labadie collection of the University of Michigan and was translated into French. The essay has been updated in Kaczynski's 2019 book, Technological Slavery, Volume 1, which further defends his political philosophy. In September 1995, the Washington Post published a 35,000-word essay titled Industrial Society and Its Future. The decision was made as part of a strategy to identify the Unabomber. Attorney General Janet Reno believed the publication could lead to the author's identification. The essay outlined a deep rejection of modern technology and called for a return to a simpler way of life. It was a manifesto of anti-technology ideology written by someone who had been sending bombs through the mail for nearly 2 decades. After reading the text, Ted Kaczynski's younger brother, David, recognized the writing style. He immediately contacted the FBI, sharing his suspicions. This moment marked a turning point in the investigation. The publication of the manifesto shifted public attention from the bombings themselves to the ideological motivations behind them. April 3, 1996, a quiet morning in Lincoln, Montana, changed the course of a decades-long investigation. Ted Kaczynski was arrested at his remote cabin following a tip from his younger brother, David. The FBI had been searching for him for nearly 2 decades, ever since the first bomb was mailed in 1978. The breakthrough came not from surveillance or forensic evidence, but from the publication of Kaczynski's manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, in the Washington Post. His brother recognized the unmistakable writing style, a style that had been hidden for years but now led directly to his brother's door. Attorney General Janet Reno had supported the decision to publish the manifesto, hoping it would bring the author into the light. It worked. The arrest marked the end of one of the longest and most expensive investigations in FBI history. For years, Kaczynski had lived in isolation, crafting a vision of the future that he believed would destroy human freedom. Now, that vision had led to his capture. What had once been a shadow in the wilderness was now a man in handcuffs. In 1998, nearly 2 decades after his bombing campaign began, Ted Kaczynski stood before a federal court in Montana. He pleaded guilty to all charges against him, bringing an official close to one of the most complex and unsettling investigations in American history. The judge delivered a sentence of multiple life terms without the possibility of parole, ensuring that Kaczynski would spend the remainder of his days confined. His actions, detailed in his chilling manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, had left a deep scar on the national psyche. Though his trial was over, the legacy of the Unabomber, a man who sought to dismantle modern society through violence, continued to spark debate about technology's role in our lives and the lengths to which individuals might go to challenge progress. June 10, 2023, Ted Kaczynski was found dead in his prison cell, the results of self-inflicted suffocation. He was 81 years old. His death marked the end of a life spent in seclusion, far from the world he once sought to destroy. In 2021, he was diagnosed with cancer and stopped treatment in 2023. The final chapter of his life unfolded in the same isolation that defined much of his existence. The man who once shaped the course of a national investigation died alone, his legacy left to history. The manifesto's publication in 1995 sparked a conversation that extended far beyond the pages of the Washington Post. Though widely condemned, Kaczynski's critique of technological progress struck a chord with some who saw in his words a warning about the direction of modern society. A 2017 Rolling Stone article noted that Kaczynski's ideas, though extreme, were among the first to raise concerns about the growing dependence on technology and the erosion of personal freedom. His text was not just a manifesto, it became a subject of academic study, translated into other languages, and preserved as a historical document. A copy remains in the Labadie collection at the University of Michigan, ensuring that Kaczynski's voice, however controversial, continues to be heard. In 1969, Ted Kaczynski walked away from a promising career in mathematics. His reasons for leaving academia remain unclear. By 1971, he was living in a remote cabin near Lincoln, Montana, far from the world he once sought to understand. He would later claim that witnessing the destruction of the wilderness around his cabin led him to believe that living in nature had become impossible. From that point, he claimed, he resolved to fight industrialization through terrorism. But what events in 1969 led Kaczynski to make this drastic decision? The answer remains elusive, buried alongside the man who chose to disappear. Between 1978 and 1995, Ted Kaczynski sent bombs through the mail to individuals and institutions he believed were contributing to the advancement of modern technology. His campaign left 3 people dead and 23 others injured. The victims were often academics and scientists, those he saw as central to the technological system he wished to dismantle. One of his earliest targets was a professor at the University of California, Berkeley, who received a bomb in the mail that injured him seriously. Another was a mathematician in Oregon who survived an attack that destroyed his home. Kaczynski's bombs were handmade, often containing materials like nails and explosives, and were sent with no warning or explanation. His victims were not chosen randomly. They were selected based on their perceived role in the industrial system he sought to dismantle. The human toll of his campaign was profound, leaving families scarred and communities in shock. Yet, despite the violence, Kaczynski remained convinced that his actions were necessary to draw attention to what he saw as an existential threat. The FBI's investigation into the Unabomber became the longest and most expensive in its history. The case was initially labeled Unabomber, a reference to the bombing of universities and airlines. The FBI worked closely with the U.S. Attorney General to identify the Unabomber's authorship of the manifesto. Attorney General Janet Reno supported the publication of the manifesto in an effort to help identify the author. The FBI collaborated with literature scholars to compare the manifesto's writing style to that of potential suspects. Kaczynski's brother David recognized the author's style and reported his suspicion to the FBI. The publication of the manifesto ultimately led to Kaczynski's identification and arrest. What made this approach unique was the FBI's willingness to use a radical strategy, publishing the manifesto in full to turn a terrorist's own words against him. It was a decision that would change the course of the investigation forever. When the Washington Post published Industrial Society and Its Future in September 1995, few realized the essay would lead to the Unabomber's capture. Among those who read it was David Kaczynski, Ted's younger brother. After reading the entire essay, David recognized the author's style, a style he knew from years of being Ted's sibling. Convinced, David and his wife sought legal counsel. A lawyer confirmed their suspicions and alerted the FBI. That decision set in motion the events that would end the Unabomber's reign of terror. What followed was not just an arrest, but a reckoning, born from the courage of one brother who chose to act even at great personal cost. Despite widespread condemnation, Kaczynski's manifesto continues to be studied and referenced in academic and activist circles. The essay has been translated into multiple languages and remains on some college reading lists, reflecting its enduring, albeit controversial, influence. Scholars debate its extreme views, but its impact on modern discourse cannot be ignored. Even now, the text is cited in discussions about technology, autonomy, and the future of society. It is a document that, for better or worse, still speaks to those who seek to challenge the trajectory of industrial progress. In his final years, Ted Kaczynski remained confined to prison walls. He continued to write and reflect on his past actions, grappling with the ideology that had driven him to violence for so long. In 2021, he received a cancer diagnosis. By March of 2023, he chose to stop treatment for the disease. On June 10th of that year, Kaczynski was found dead in his cell, having taken his own life. His death marked the end of a life defined by a fierce critique of modern society and a relentless pursuit of his beliefs through acts of terrorism. The prison walls held him for nearly a quarter century, but within them, he wrestled with his choices and ultimately chose to end his own existence rather than face the consequences of his actions any longer. Subscribe if you want the next case broken down the same way.